So on this video, we're going to install the USCAR Tool rear spring relocation kit. What it does, it moves the rear springs, the leaf springs in about 3 inches. If you look at my last video, we did outer wheel tub, the mini tub install. So the second part of that really is a spring relocation kit. You can't do one without the other and reap the benefits of the wide tire, because either you need the mini tubs to get the wide tire in there, and then the springs will be in the way. So what this kit does is pretty easy install. There's a lot of pre-preparation. We done some of it, and I'll go through that. This is where your stock leaf spring would be. The mount's coming right off here. This is going to be the new mount. So you see that's the distance. It's going to move it over in the front. This would be the right side, and this is going to mount it right in the rear frame rail where it starts curving up right here. So this is where we're going to have to notch the frame rail and weld this in. And then same thing, this is the left side. And then the rears, they're going to come off the frame rail and relocate the rear shackles about the same distance. We also got these spring perches. What we're going to do with them, we're going to just put these on the 8 3/4 axle. He's having a custom Dana 60 built for this car. But right now, to roll it around, the car's still got to go sandblaster and get all this done. We'll go ahead and just get the 8 3/4 tacked up with those plates. We took some notes and some measurements beforehand. I'll post those up now and show you what we got, and I'll show you how we got those. So here's that paper I told you about. You could copy it, save it. It should be similar in your car, and I'll show you where I dropped these points in a second and how we took it. This is going to be a reference for when we go back and we can double check everything. At this point, this is exactly how I went through, and I decided to take my measurements for that piece of paper. So we're dropping a plumb bob down on the front leaf spring bolt. We're doing on the outside and the inside, and I'm basically using that as the center point reference for the front spring. At this point, I'm throwing some square tubing across where the axle would be. I'm right behind the pins, basically where the axle perches would sit. We're taking this. I know it's not directly where the axle is, but as long as we take our reference after the job's all tacked into place and we make sure that's the same, that's all we care about. So even if the axle's not exactly in that location, it's an inch back, as long as we know beforehand it's an inch back and after it's an inch back, then we're good. So same thing on this side. I'm taking the front spring mounts, the left and right of where the bolt is. So when I put my new spring mounts on there, we're going to remeasure off that same bolt and double check everything. So I'm in the back now. I'm basically dropping off the shackle here. I'm just showing you how I'm marking all my plumb blobs. We got the outside of the shackle here, and then now I'm marking the inside, with basically that center is where I circle it. Here's some pictures describing exactly what I was just talking about, where I'm centered on the bolt, the plumb blobs drop down, and I'm also doing this to double check because I'm running my tape line now where I'm going to paint these markers and where I'm going to keep it. We're also measuring the leaf spring. So you see in the center, we're about 48 1/4 inches. This is the factory settings. This is up front 47 1/2 where the front spring perches are, and the rear shackles are about 50 3/8. There's some movement in the springs and the bushing, so just be aware of this, but that's where I was taking my measurements just to reference how much we move the springs in when it's all said and done. So you saw we did a lot with the plumb blob, dropping it down, and I taped off some areas. I marked some areas off for where our shackle bolts are, our leaf spring pads, things like that. Like I said earlier, we're going to go over, and the frame's going to be notched right here. That's about where the leaf spring's going to be in line. And you see what I did off those marks. I actually took some tape and then ran some paint lines, because what's going to happen is this right here was where the leaf spring was coming down off the plumb blob on the floor, and what we're going to do, we're going to be over 3 inches. So even though we move over, we're going to move over in that line, and that's the same reference point with the axle. This is the bar reference for the axle and the rear. I also took the measurements on the paper I showed you in case this car moves. If this car doesn't move, everything lines up, we'll double check all these measurements and drop it down with a plumb blob and we're good to go. If for some reason the car does move or something happens, we can go ahead and just re-drop the lines and remark them and then retape them. I also took one measurement on the front. That's going to be just an area of the car. On both sides, there's a hole there in the front torsion bar cross member. I dropped a plumb blob off that, and then that's going to be my one mark that we're not messing with anything. So if all else fails, we go back to that as our main reference point. And I mean, all in all, we verified also that this car is pretty straight for the most part. I mean, there's like a 1/8 of an inch variance, you know, in the cross and the leaf springs, but that could be in any leaf spring car. When they put the rear end in, we're gonna have to square it up anyway to double check it, and there's a little bit of play there. So stay tuned. We'll get this install going, and hopefully it helps you out in what you're doing. So here we are with the plasma. We're making our rough cuts for our front spring perches. They go right where the frame rail is, so you can see where you're gonna cut. I would say, you know, cut back a little bit, especially if you're using a plasma. It's not the cleanest thing, so it's kind of hard to get a good straight area when welding. So I cut about, I figured it was 1/4 or 1/8 inch down, and you kind of see I'm curving up a little bit, but that's fine. When I go back through with my cutoff wheel, we'll go ahead and clean it up a little more, and grinding wheel when we finish it off. It's just easier to get the plasma in a lot of these tight areas and get the rough cut. And then you go back through and just test fit, and you see where you mark where you got to go, and just keep doing this process until you get a really good clean cut. Now I went on to the other side, and it's the same process, just kind of cutting out all the stuff. You see you're going to lose the e-brake bracket there, so that's going to have to be relocated if you decide to keep your e-brakes. Something else to figure out. This is just showing where on the other side we're going into. There's a box frame area right there, so you could see it. I mean, you're going to come right across the leaf spring perch, and that's where you're going to cut it. At this point, I have the rear brackets, and I guess they didn't come welded from USCAR Tool. I guess that's to adjust them a little bit. I put them up there and test fit them. They look good, so I'm going to just go ahead and TIG weld them out of the car and then put them back up there. I don't see a reason where, I mean, they're all tacked into place, so I guess if something's different on your car, you can move the brackets and make them wider or shorter, but at this point, they fit good up there, so like I said, we'll go ahead and just TIG weld them. They'll look a little bit nicer anyway, and then we'll go ahead in the next step and put the brackets up there, and it's one less step to just weld upside down in the car, and just gonna get a better job doing on the workbench like this. All right, we got our leaf spring mounts. They're cut out in the car where they're gonna go. We used the cutoff wheel, the plasma, and then we finished it off with the grinding wheel. I put some weld through primer on the front mounts where we're gonna not be able to get to the back of it. Same thing on the car. Everything that was gonna be, you know, behind anything, it's had weld through primer. So let's go ahead and install this. We'll do the front first, and I'll show you on the rear. We're gonna bolt these in. I made the holes a little bit bigger, and I put a 7/16 bolt in there. So let's go ahead and bolt this in. So we're going to use the stock factory leaf spring bolts. We'll speed up the process here, but yeah, we're just putting 4 bolts in. I got the jack stand supporting it, and you'll see as I tighten it back down that the edge will pull it back up. It naturally wants to go into the frame rail, and then that's when you know you got a really good tight quality fit. So now we're gonna see right here, we're gonna leave everything bolted in because we still have to check this, but see right here we're gonna tack this very edge. You see how tight this is right here? So that's what we want, and then we're gonna go put 2 tacks right there just so it doesn't move. And we'll be moving on to the back end, and then we'll go ahead and measure everything. All right, and what that's gonna do, that's gonna let us check everything, knowing it's gonna stay in that spot. And if everything checks out good, we'll go ahead and weld that. All right, so you saw we welded up these corners on the lower bracket. This has already been test fit. I'm gonna show you a little trick. I found this. I was looking for something to align the holes. This is a shaft. I believe it's a 1-inch shaft off a Saginaw counter. It's a counter shaft off a Saginaw 3-speed transmission. So you could see this fits in there perfect with almost no play. So this is what we're going to use to line our old shackles with our new shackles to make sure they're in line. So, and the bushings will have more play than that. So just a little trick, if you can find a Saginaw 3-speed, 4-speed, 60s, 70s transmission, the counter shaft works perfect. So right here, this bar, there's a little bracket right here, and it's going to go up. There's a lip right there. You'll see that's where this bracket right here is going to sit flush against. So you see this kind of goes up right there, and then what you do, you come on this side, and then these two brackets, that one right there, mates right up against that bracket, just slides right in there, and that's your mark. So we'll put that up there. They have it pretty much idiot proof, I guess you'd say. And then knowing that, look how that slides in. So right there, that's coming out both our shackles. You can see I can let go, and that's in place. But let's go ahead and finish clamping it now, and that's going to be our mark. We know our shackles are right in line. Same thing on this one. We're going to go ahead and test fit, and then tack this up in a couple different spots. And then when it's all said and done, we'll go back and weld it after everything's verified. Just kind of pushing the bracket in a couple spots. Get the welder out, and we'll tack that thing. There's no specific place to put your tacks, but I'm trying to keep them in the corners where I can still cut them out, but it's really holding every part of this bracket in place. What I don't want is when I pull these vice grips off, this bracket to move at all, because I'm going to go ahead and bolt the springs in and measure everything to make sure we're good to go before we do the final weld up. So just a little tip there. So right there, that's a good sign that our shackles are in line. We'll go ahead and do the other side, and we'll check all of these then. And at this point now we're bolting in the front spring perch for the driver's side. Same process as the passenger side. This one, something just wasn't right. It was pulling down when I tightened it up, so I just helped it up with the jack a little bit. So we found our first problem. Go ahead and when we were welding this on, I noticed that this looked like it was aiming toward the outside of the rear shackle a little bit versus that one, where that one looks straight. I started looking closer on the car. I took this measurement right here, and that's 1 inch on the inside. That's pretty much in line with our shackle going to the rear. This one right here was kind of pointed out that way. After doing some digging and research on the car, the torque box, the factory torque box is welded inside where the frame rail pretty much stops here and where that one was. So there's a little variance in the car. So what we're going to do, we're going to just go ahead and fix it now and just adjust it. It's only a 1/4 inch, not even 1/8 of an inch. But we'll go ahead and make sure they're straight, and then we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and push this up. And I think that's why this one's trying to hang down a little bit too. So our new mark, where we're shooting for, that's where we were. We want this on the outside of frame rail, and I'll recheck that mark. So we use our monkey on the stick. Gotta kind of hold it up. It's gonna probably be a balancing act, but I'll figure it out. There we go. So now That should be about 1 inch right there. Yeah, that's exactly at 1 inch where we want it. Actually, I want to go just a hair more. I don't know if I go that. There it is. That was our move right there. So now, both of these brackets, yep, are matching each other. We'll go ahead and just tack them on. So we pop the monkey on the step, we drop our jack down, we'll verify we have our 1/4 inch on this side and our 1 inch on that side. So now both brackets are straight. So we'll go ahead and do the rear now. So now that we're done with the front spring mounts, we'll go ahead and do the driver's side rear spring perch. Same thing, we're using that counter shaft, tap it in, it's a snug fit and that's fine as long as it's straight, and it does slide in and out, and I verified that after we tacked this in, it did slide in and out. Go ahead and clamp it and just tack the corners, and then you come back through and a little bit of gap in between the floor pan, we'll just fix it there. Another problem I run into is we had to cut a little bit of inner wheel well because we couldn't get we're not gonna be able to get the welder in when it is time to go ahead and weld this thing. So on both sides, just be aware you're gonna have to do a little trimming at that point. Now we'll go ahead and remove the old factory front spring perches because we're not going to use them because we just welded in the USCAR Tool front spring perches and the springs bolt directly to them. So unbolt these things and pretty much throw them away as far as you're concerned. You don't need them. And then we're going to put the springs in now while everything's tacked in place to make sure all those lines we took earlier and drew on the ground line up well. So you'll see on the new brackets there's 4 holes. The rear 2 holes are for super stock springs, and the front 2 holes are if you're using a stock style spring. Also, the heights of these holes, the higher you go up, the less drive and bite you're going to take in the car. Now, looking at these brackets, we're going to put them back in the factory location, and that's also what we're going to use to measure it. So it's going to be the baseline. It's what I know. It's what we took our measurements off. So this is where we're going back in. Now, we drop our plumb bobs again, and you'll see the front mounts actually were pushed back a 1/4 inch on both sides. I don't think it's going to matter on anything. They are square. They just got pushed back, probably that plate, and that takes the axle back a 1/4 inch. Same thing, this is both sides of the axle. We're back a 1/4 inch. We're nickel and diming at this point. Now, the rear spring mounts, they completely lined up off the shackles exactly where they are. So basically that front is just slightly back. We're also 4.5 inches in on both sides of the spring. The driver's side and passenger side, everything checked out and lined up perfect, minus that 1/4 inch back. So I'd say we're squared in, everything's good to go. You're never going to notice that difference. So we'll go ahead and start the welding process. At this point, I'm just welding everywhere that metal touches the car. I mean, put some weld on it. I left the bolts in place. I think they look cleaner. I could have plug welded the holes and everything, but I like the way they look. I think it's fine. Another safety thing to hold something in there, and they just kind of held the guide. So do what you want with that. You see, I actually welded in the R and the L on both sides too. Again, I didn't see a reason to really keep that. This is where I cut that piece off, the inner wheel well. You'll see even now with that piece cut off how hard it is to get the welder in there. It's just kind of, it's in there about a 1/4 inch, and you're just reaching with the welder, and you're kind of upside down. It's one of those things. This is not really the best thing to weld. But just, you know, take your time. If you got to do 2 passes on it, do 2 passes. We're on the final weld of the rear bracket, and of course we got to put our counter shaft back in to make sure, even though it's tacked in place, I don't want this thing to move, and that big 1-inch pin really is going to hold it in place along with our tacks. I also, like I said, tapped the floor pan down, and I'm just kind of stitch welding this. You got a really thick metal with the frame brackets, and then you're going to a real thin sheet metal trunk pan. So just work your heat on the frame rail brackets, and then kind of just pull it up into the trunk pan is the best way to do it. And just like I said, little stitch welding. Now that everything's welded on the car, and I know what my measurements got pulled in as far as the leaf springs, 4.5 inches, we'll go ahead and just put these new perches on the rear end. Again, this was just temporary, you know, he's getting another rear end, so I got him close with an angle finder off both sides and everything, and I'm just tacking the corners because I'm assuming they're going to pull these spring perches off. Whoever's doing this rear end will probably go on another car, and I don't want to make their life miserable. This is basically just to get the car rolling around, and I'm double checking my center line marks. You see, nothing really too crazy here. But we'll go ahead, this will allow us to get the rear end back in the car and it on wheels and rolling around and mobile. Alright, we're going to wrap up our rear spring relocation kit. So go along with our mini tubs. That's going to give us about 9 inches shorter on the rear end, which is about 16 inches on the wheel well clearance. I think the owner said he's going to put a 12.5-inch tire. I think he's run a Hoosier, which I heard runs a little bit wider, so I think his tires will be something around 13 inches. That puts our spring perches we welded on this rear end, and this is just temporary because this 8 3/4 rear end is junk. He's putting a Dana 60. That's why I didn't spend a lot of time on pinion angle and all that stuff. But the new spring perches are about 4.5 inches in from that outside. You could see the difference there. So when the rear end gets, you know, shortened on both sides 4.5 inches, that puts us 52.5 outside hub to outside hub. The springs are going to be changed too, so this is just off to sandblasting like this, and then, you know, the owner will bolt in his own stuff. But we got the rear brackets welded in. Didn't really bother cleaning them up. The weld looks pretty good. They're stronger that way. It was hard to really weld up in the inside of a lot of these areas, just getting the gun in there, but do your best you can. A little tidbit, it's easier if you also tap the floor down if you have a couple gaps on the inside. So that's something you can do up here and also on these front brackets in the front. If you tap the floor down and get them a little bit tighter, that helps. I put 2 passes on some of these welds for the same reason, just because it was hard to get the gun all the way up in this area right there. So, but the brackets come out good. They're not moving. Everything's straight. This thing's ready to go off to blaster. And again, it's going to wrap it up on this project, and we'll move on to the next one. Thank you. Hopefully it's helped you. I recommend this kit if you try, you know, shorten the rear end and put big fat tires in the back of your car. You got to do, again, you're going to have to do the wheel tubs and the spring relocation kit to benefit from either of them. So if you missed it, check out our wheel tub video, and hope you enjoyed this one. Like, subscribe, and share our videos, comment. We appreciate it. Have a good day.